Welcome back, everyone. This is part 2 of lecture 2 or session 2, and we're continuing to look at determinants of health, and in particular social determinants of health. So this is the one of the frameworks that we looked at in lecture 1, so in the previous lecture. And you'll remember, hopefully, that so the shaded areas are these particularly important social determinants of health. And again, the aim of this graphic is to visually represent how the different determinants or things that influence the influences of health outcomes, how they're all interrelated, how they all interact in order to lead to particular health outcomes for an individual over their lifetime. So important social determinants include culture, affluence, so the extent to which someone is well off or society is well off, social cohesion, social inclusion. These things we'll be talking more about shortly. Political structures obviously influence how much healthcare is going to be available, for example. So even just thinking about the difference between Australia and the United States, or the United States and Canada. The different environmental factors around, so we'll talk a little bit about it today, but more so later in the subject, how much something such as global warming is an actual determinant of individuals' health. So it's part of something that we need to take into account in public health. It's a factor which is a determinant of people's health. Global warming, pollution, things like that. It's part of the environment in which we live. Socioeconomic characteristics which are important. We can see that education, employment, some of these things we spoke about it earlier in today's session, and I'll talk a little bit more about very soon. Income and wealth, family, neighborhood, housing, access to services, whether or not someone's a migrant or a refugee, and food security. So all really important social determinants. So we'll have a quick look here at this social determinants of health according to the World Health Organization. So let's go back to number 1. So according to World Health Organization, social determinants of health include poverty, social exclusion, poor housing, poor health systems are among the main causes of ill health. So and looking at that picture here, thinking about this in a global context, so not so much in the Australian context. I mean, of course, housing is still most certainly a determinant of health in Australia, but particularly if we think about the level of housing as it varies between countries. Poverty, social exclusion there as well. Differences in the quality of life within and between countries and how long people live. A child born in Japan has a chance of living 43 years longer than a child born in Sierra Leone. The probability of a man dying between the ages of 15 and 60 is 8.2% in Sweden, 48.5% in the Russian Federation, and 84.5% in Lesotho. It reminds me of an interesting fact also about Estonia, which is a country in Northeast Europe I lived in for many years. I'm part Estonian and went back there to connect with my ethnic heritage, and has been in particular a poor driving culture amongst young to middle-aged men, and that window of age. So I'm not sure if it's exactly the same as that, but that early adulthood to middle adulthood or to middle age is one in which the probability of a man dying in, say, Estonia is much higher than it is in, for example, Sweden, that has a much safer driving culture. But then once a male gets beyond, say, around 50 years of age, their life expectancy is the same as someone in Sweden. In Australia, there's a 20-year age gap in the life expectancy between Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and those, or than the average Australian. So, shocking statistic. It shows that being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander origin in Australia is a huge social determinant of health and well-being. Low and middle income countries account for 85% of the world's road deaths, Well, there you go. I mean, Estonia is still a middle-income country, and certainly, you know, that the level of income of a country in general and the culture around certain issues is a huge social determinant of health and well-being. In 2002, nearly 11 million children died before reaching their 5th birthday. 89% of these deaths were in developing countries. So again, the level of development, the level of income of a country, a major determinant of health and well-being, or of life and death, essentially. Inequality in income is increasing in countries that account for more than 80% of the world's population. So within those countries themselves, the gap between the rich and the poor is increasing. And few governments have explicit policies for tackling socially determined health inequalities. So some really important points there from the World Health Organization. That one there is a YouTube video from the World Health Organization. I'll get you to watch that in your own time. And just reminding about the Ottawa Charter. So remember the Ottawa conference in 1986 and the importance of the prerequisites for health. So whether or not there's peace, shelter, education for people, adequate food, income, stable ecosystems, sustainable resources, social justice and equity are the underlying things that are necessary there in order for people to have a basic standard of health and well-being. Let's close that down and return to the slides. You can see them over there, the important factors. So widespread acceptance of social determinants of health, or SDH, is the key driver of health. Take a look at the World Health Organization link there. It's a bit slow. So social determinants of health is solid facts, 2nd edition. So looking at all those issues there as being social determinants of health across the globe. Again, it's something you can look more at in your own time. Thinking about sustainable development goals from the United Nations. So in the social determinants of health from the World Health Organization, they talk about social gradient in terms of stress, all of those social determinants of health, with level of income being a major determinant. If we see that ending poverty is one of the United Nations, well, it's #1 sustainable development growth, sustainable development goal. So thinking about how that goal is a public health policy issue. So how much would we reduce the levels of inequity that we see across different groups of socially determined factors, and how much income and how it's related to other things like type of job, type of education, and other health and other things that lead to poorer health outcomes. So that's the main UN goal. So it really underscores how much how important social determinants of health really are. And the final report from the WHO Commission on social determinants of health. So their commission was established in March 2005. It aimed to draw the attention of governments and society to the social determinants of health in creating better social conditions for health, particularly among the most vulnerable people in the world. The Commission delivered that final report, which is or isn't opening. If it doesn't open, I'll just get you to look at it in your own time. So it delivered that final report in July 2008 and then subsequently ended its function. So the social determinants of health are still a major concern for the World Health Organization, but that particular unit within the the Commission on Social Determinants of Health ended its operation in July 2008 when it delivered this report. can see all sorts of connections to the things that we've already spoken about. So equity from the start, gender, land rights, living in rural areas, governance, employment-related issues, social protection, universal healthcare. So you can see the importance of the issues that we've been speaking about. Okay. So there's a view of what we've been looking at, a graphic of the how the different levels all interact, and it's very similar to the one that we saw before. So at the top you've got your general socio-economic, cultural and environmental conditions. The next level down we've got things such as housing, education, work, employment. Then your social and community networks that you interact with below that. So you've got your sort of organizational systems, your own networks, and then your individual lifestyle factors and your age, sex, genetics, things that make you up, how all those levels interact with each other. Going to talk a bit more about the Australian context, but I might stop it there before we move into that.